travelers, you are listening to Všesvet Podcast. Podcast which takes you every week to discover both popular holiday destinations and unknown parts of the world. Podcast where we talk about unconventional ways of traveling, but also about tours and trips organized by travel agencies. My name is Tina Paholik-Hamárová and this is the very first episode recorded in English, as Všesvet is a Slovak podcast streaming since 2018. I would like to thank my guests, professional tour guides and photographers Temu and Alex Ross from Open Sky Expeditions, for taking this big step with us and willingness to talk about their trip to Galapagos and tips on how to make your experience unforgettable through the photographs. Ahojte cestovateľky a cestovatelia, počúvate špeciálnu novoročnú epizódu Všesvet Podcastu, ktorá okrem toho, že bude mať výnimočných hostí, ako prvá epizóda Všesvetu bude celá v angličtine. Moje pozvanie do virtuálneho štúdia prijali dlhoroční expediční sprievodcovia, fotografi a dobrodruhovia Temu a Alex Ross z Open Sky Expeditions, ktorí sa okrem netradičných destinácií zameriavajú aj na tipy, ako si z výletu odniesť čo najkrajšie spomienky vo forme fotiek. Dnes sa s nimi vyberieme na Galapágy. Verím, že vás v novom roku dostatočne inšpirujeme. Temu, Alex, welcome to Všesvet Podcast.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I'm sorry for the long intro. I just would like to explain to the all listeners who just turned on Všesvet Podcast for the very first time, which is this about, and also to kind of explain to our long-term listeners from Slovakia that this is a very, very unique special episode, which is a little experiment from my side. And you are actually part of it. I hope so. You'll be all right with that.
Absolutely.
Oh, we're absolutely honored. Thank you.
So have you met anyone from Slovakia before?
Only Mate, who he was the one who sort of introduced us. We have sort of a mutual friend. I think, Matt, you're the first Slovakian that I have ever met, if I'm not mistaken. Perhaps I've come across one in travels, but certainly the first one who I've known in some capacity. And now I've met you, Tina. So that's two, and I guess we know Matt's wife as well. So I'm up to three. I'm up to three. Yeah,
wife,
of course.
Exactly.
Of course.
Oh, that's pretty good. By any chance, were you dropping by in Slovakia or just like going through the country? No?
I have not, Alex. I
don't
think
so.
Exotic.
We like to say we're very well traveled, but geez, we have not been to Slovakia as far as I know.
Okay.
No,
Well,
I don't think so.
We must go.
Definitely, yeah. Now is a good time actually to finally go to Slovakia. But anyway, so I would like to really introduce you. You are working together for a couple of years already. You have an agency called Open Sky Expeditions. So maybe Alex, tell me more about how this whole idea to work together and maybe to introduce people photography on the travels kind of became.
Sure. So we're kind of lifelong travelers, kind of born into traveling around the world, passionate explorers that fell into the travel business like most people, I think, unexpectedly do, are experts in small group travels and are photographers ourselves. And it's with kind of that combination that we came to creating Open Sky. So, yeah, Temu and I were working for a company called Travel Dynamics International that did educational tours on small ships kind of all around the world. I started out as a tour leader for them back in 2004.
Oh, wow.
Very long time ago.
It's been a while.
Yeah, 2003, 2004, indeed. And then, was doing that job. I was pretty young. Taking advantage of my language skills and a lot of my travel background because I grew up in many different countries and had traveled a lot myself. And then several years into that, I met Temu and hired him into that company to kind of do very similar things to me. I probably ran and led trips in over 50 countries.
Okay. And I also heard that you speak 6 languages. Is that
Aha,
right?
so Temu has given up my secrets.
Oh, no. I'm sorry. You had it all written on your website.
Yeah,
that's right. That's right. Okay. Public secrets. I speak 6 languages. I speak 4 quite fluently and 2 conversationally and a little bit of a 7th.
Something crazy?
So,
Chinese?
the 7th is Greek.
Okay.
So, the 6
random.
is Greek. The 7th is a little Arabic.
Okay, lovely.
Yeah. My first language is Spanish.
Great. So if I will then spread my podcast into other language versions, I'll give you a call.
Sure, you can give me a call. Well, you've started today, right?
Oh yeah. It's been a bit tough, and I'm sorry. I have to probably tell to the listeners that my English is not like 100%, especially in the mornings. But I'll do my best. Anyway, Temu, please introduce yourself.
Well, thank you once again. Yeah, my name is Temu. And as Alex said, I started in the travel industry at Travel Dynamics International, the company where we used to work. And I mean, Alex is being modest. He said that we met there, but Alex hired me into that company. It's through him, that I gained all this experience. It was funny at the company. I was known as Alex 2.0, sort of the beta version, but with a whole lot of bugs. I wasn't quite as efficient as he was. So I did some tour leading, a little bit of trip designing. I also did sales, and eventually I became a cruise director on a ship of 130 passengers. And it was an incredible education because not only were you learning things from these experts, of course, who were coming, professors and thought leaders and people that were very high up in their respective fields, but also the travel itself was very demanding because these were very, very high-end and demanding clientele who expected things to run smoothly all the time. Part of our job as tour leaders on these programs was to put together photographic slideshows. And both of us were interested in photography. And naturally, you just kind of got better because you had to, even if you didn't want to, which we wanted to. So we both had a natural affinity for photography. And then Alex started Open Sky Expeditions and started focusing on combining his love of photography with, small group travels. Alex really scaled it back to make something a little more intimate and personal with 10 or 12 people. And that's actually a really great size to then also add in photography because you can have personal instruction and you're not getting in the way of people.
Yeah.
And he kind of brought me in 2013 and we've been very good friends, best friends kind of since then working together. And it's been an incredible blessing. I'm so fortunate.
Yeah. And you are mentioning cruises a lot. Is it something that you are focusing on? Is it
we got a lot of experience working on small ships while we were with Travel Dynamics. I would say actually for probably the first 7 years of being with Open Sky, almost everything that we did was on land.
Oh, okay.
And it's just that there were a number of destinations that we wanted to get to, that we wanted to kind of incorporate, where the way to experience those places is on a small cruise or on a small boat, like Antarctica, Galapagos, Alaska, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, let's get to the point. Which countries are you actually offering now? So you've done the West Coast Africa tour, which I probably, when you said I survived that, so I can do anything.
Yeah, exactly. Pretty much. It was like a big training ground. But Morocco was one of the places that I'd been to many times that I thought was really compelling. So when I started my business, I actually moved there for a little while to get to know it really well.
Okay.
And that year, I ran the first photography trip that we did. That was in 2012. And it was a year afterwards that Temu came. And then, since then, we've been adding lots of different places like Namibia, Sicily, Chile, South India, Peru, Guatemala, Northern Norway for Northern Lights, Greece. We're at Bhutan,
Alaska, Galapagos.
Yeah, where else did we go, Temu?
Galapagos and Antarctica. Yeah, we've got a pretty good sort of stable of trips for places kind of around the world. I think the only continent that we are not actively hitting is Australia, New Zealand, and New Zealand may be in the works for the future. Yeah. So
that's okay.
Yeah,
that's okay, because I lived in Australia for 3 years and I published like 6 episodes of Všesvet Podcast about it. So it's okay. It's covered already.
Nice. We'll call you.
Oh, yeah. Oh, please. I'm happy to take you around. That
That's
would be
exactly
just really
right,
great.
yeah.
So I would like to actually focus on one of the destinations you mentioned today, and it's Galapagos, because I haven't talked about this country in my podcast, because I actually think people from Slovakia don't even think that it's possible to get there easily. So that's why I would like to talk about this country. Just first kind of explain me, why did you put this destination on your list? Like, I have some ideas, but I would like to hear that.
Well, number one, it's unusual, of course, for us, I think, as folks who are in North America. You know, everybody has heard of the Galapagos here, and certainly many people have not had the opportunity to go. But it's unusual to think about the Galapagos as an unknown destination, because so many people here are so familiar with it. I think for us growing up, I grew up as like an animal lover. I was obsessed by nature. I was obsessed with wildlife. I loved the history of Charles Darwin and, you know, his theories on evolution. And there are places in the world, and the Galapagos is one of them, where you have animals, we call them endemic species that you will find nowhere else on the planet. The Galapagos has several of them. So from a wildlife standpoint, it's really amazing that way. And the islands themselves lend themselves to photography in many ways because they're beautiful, they're varied, they're geologically active. There's stuff to see underwater as well as above the water, because you have 5 major currents that all converge at the Galapagos. So you have this incredible biodiversity. And importantly, the animals there have been protected for a really long time, and they have lost their fear of humans. Nobody has hunted them for close to 100 years now. So they are just everywhere, and they don't care about you. They don't run from you. You can walk right up to them, or they come up to you. The inquisitive ones come up to you. So, and then photographically, it's just incredible, and it makes things so easy because the animals are right there. And even for a lot of folks, you know, getting to Ecuador. So the Galapagos are part of Ecuador, the country. And although they are, of course, quite a ways off the coast, about a 2.5-hour flight or so, 2-hour flight west of Ecuador, that's not difficult to get to Ecuador. South America is fairly accessible. So once you get to Ecuador, it's a pretty easy shot to get over to the Galapagos.
Yeah. Would you say that there is like a specific type of travelers that they should be maybe appealing for?
I mean, Temu has way more experience with the Galapagos. We have kind of varying experience in many places. But I mean, anyone that finds the natural world compelling, so people that have like even kind of the smallest interest in wildlife, I think will be blown away. And particularly with us, you know, we have a focus on photography, so, and an incredible place to practice photography, also with a photo pro like Temu. And we travel on a small vessel, so people that are interested perhaps in a more intimate experience.
Yeah.
Importantly, with an incredible staff and with an incredible naturalist. So for us, it's the picking local partners that come kind of extremely well reviewed from people that we trust is kind of the most important thing. And that's how kind of we got to who we are working with in the Galapagos.
Of course. So people who are into photography, wildlife, and like ship skills, like brushing the floors in the morning and things like that.
Maybe we should incorporate that.
That's the part
in our next one.
Yeah, exactly.
For a cup of rum, of course.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, we don't tell anybody that. We just get them to the ship, and then we hand them the mop and, you know, the polish for the wood and that sort
it's
of thing.
It's a part of experience.
And then all the other photographers actually take pictures of them doing
No, I would, you know, just to add on to what Alex was saying, I would agree with all of that. But doing it also holistically, you know, you get the whole picture. It's not just about the wildlife. You're going to hear about the human history going back hundreds of years when it was used as a whaling port, and you see some of the old whaling stations and the history during World War II when it was used. Some of the islands were used as a radar base for the United States during World War II. I mean, you get to really understand the whole picture of the Galapagos. Galapagos. And we've been blessed to work with incredible guides and naturalists all over the world. And truly one of the best we have ever worked with is the gentleman that we have in Galapagos. His name is Juan. And he is just the most incredible naturalist who can really bring this whole place alive. And they have to have a touch of an adventurous spirit, just because it's an expedition style program, you know? Things on an expedition don't run perfectly. We are moving things around to take advantage of wildlife as it comes and goes, and wind and tide and this kind of thing. And so you have to be willing to...
volcanoes.
Yeah, you have to be willing to... Exactly, volcanoes. You have to be willing to roll with the punches just a little bit. So that's the kind of person that I think this trip really attracts.
Yeah. All right. So let's dive into this trip. So I just would like to say that there is 21 islands on the Galapagos. So Temu, can you maybe just kind of explain how many of them are you visiting during the trip that you are taking?
Yeah. So our trip is a little unusual. It's a 10-night trip. We decided to do a little bit of a longer program because we wanted to visit both the islands in the northern half and some of the southern islands as well, because you get to see more wildlife. Geologically, you get to see different features and islands in different stages, because some of the islands are quite new. Some of the islands are very old. So we visit Santa Cruz, Genovesa, Marchena, Isabella, Fernandina, Floriana, Española, Gardner Islands, and Isla Lobos. We make a couple snorkeling stops. That's another feature of this program, which is just excellent, is we get to go snorkeling at a couple other places that are technically part of other islands, but we may not actually get onto the mainland.
And how many of these islands are actually inhabited? There are people living on them?
Well, there are 3 main settlements, I believe, in the Galapagos. So 3 of the islands, I think, are inhabited, or there are 2 settlements on one island and 1 settlement on another. Okay. But
just to have a picture that most of them are probably just wildlife, no humans.
Right. That's a great point. Yeah. So the Galapagos is not only a protected natural park, the land, but also I think it was the world's first marine protected area as well. So the waters around the Galapagos are a protected national park as well. And so there are some individuals that live kind of really on their own in the islands if their families have been there for quite some time. But most of them are centered in about 3 communities, the biggest of which is Porto Ayora, which I believe has a population of about 10,000, maybe 5 to 10,000, but it's fairly small.
Right, that's okay. Fairly small. Let's call it few.
Yeah, a few thousand.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but the local guide, Juan, I think he said, he's from Galapagos originally, right? So he lives there all his life.
Yes. Yeah, that's correct. His father was a guide there for many, many years. He grew up there. And for anyone who grows up on the island, they all know each other. Everyone knows everyone. If you're from this area.
That must be really horrible for the rumors, I guess.
Yeah.
You just know each other.
I think it's like any super small town, right? That there's just no privacy in the end. So pretty limited full-time population there.
Okay. So what should we kind of prepare before going to Galapagos? Is there any kind of visa process that we need to do, or we need to, manage to get special boots there, or snorkeling stuff or something? What should I prepare as a person who wants to travel there?
Well, okay. So for visa and entry requirements, of course, it depends on the country you're coming from. And, sometimes it's even depends on where have you been recently. Sometimes if you've been to a country that, for instance, has yellow fever or something, then you need to get some sort of a visa. But generally, visa entry requirements are pretty straightforward and simple. I know for us, I believe it's 180-day single or multiple entry visa that we can get pretty easily. But you do have to pay a special park entry fee to go to the Galapagos, which is something that we as the tour company take care of. Yeah, we take care of that for people. So it would be their responsibility to make their way to Ecuador. And from Ecuador, we sort of collect you there, and then we'll take you to the Galapagos. And we can talk a little bit more about that in just a moment. We do full pre-trip briefings for people if they would like them, where we get on Zoom and we talk talk all through all the questions you may have. We go over the itinerary. We talk about packing lists, what you should bring photography-wise, but also what you should bring packing-wise. And I would say if I really had to narrow it down for an expedition-style program in the Galapagos, you really want to think about things like quick drying clothes, layers, because it's going to be really warm during the day, but then getting cold towards the evening. You want shoes that are going to be able to do wet and dry, right? So that you can move from the water right into the sand. You don't have to take off your sneakers, but, wet, dry sort of sandals or shoes of that nature. You may want a walking stick. You certainly want sun protection, a little bit of wind protection, sunscreen. The snorkeling equipment is all provided for you. So all you have to bring is yourself and a bathing suit. That would help. A bathing suit would certainly help.
So there are not nudistic options, yeah.
Well, listen, what you do on your own time is up to you. But no, I would say, generally speaking, people are generally in bathing suits. And actually, I should mention that in the Galapagos, because it's a protected place, people really aren't allowed to wander on their own. So we stay as a group pretty much the entire time that we're together, but we can, spread out a little bit. It's just that people can't go and wander off on their own.
Yeah, that's okay. We'll get to the logistics, like maybe how to prepare more for these kind of expeditions. But which kind of animals are actually wandering around, and which are the endemic ones that you can see only there and nowhere else?
The Galapagos is full of wildlife, particularly because, like I said, all those ocean currents, there's 5 major currents that are meeting there, which means that not only is the sea life incredible, but that's where all the life on land originally comes from. And that's where it's really the base of the food chain comes from, all of that really nutrient-rich water. For the things that are endemic to the Galapagos, where you're really only going to see in the Galapagos, you have the flightless cormorant, which cormorant is a kind of bird, which you have all over the world. They're also called shags, cormorants. They're fishing birds, they're water birds, but these ones have lost the ability to fly, so their wings have no real feathers on them anymore. They look almost like baby birds' wings. They only swim, and they dive. They're incredible divers and fishers. It's the only place where you'll see cormorants that are flightless. It's the only place in the world where you will see marine iguanas. So these are swimming lizards. They can be anywhere from maybe I'm so bad with the metric, but like a foot, 12 inches. I don't know how many centimeters roughly that is.
Oh wow! I can't even tell.
26 centimeters or something.
26 centimeters. Okay.
Okay.
They can get up to quite large. They feed on algae underwater, so they have to dive and swim. It's the only place in the world where you would see those. The blue-footed boobies.
That's a very interesting name, by the way.
It is.
I've never heard it before, honestly. I was trying to Google it, and I found really weird stuff.
Yeah, I was going to say, if you Google booby, you're going to be in for all kinds of interesting stuff. But there are red-footed boobies, which you find elsewhere. There are Nazca boobies, which you also find elsewhere. Although the largest breeding populations of both of those birds, I believe, are in the Galapagos. The blue-footed boobies are very famous, and they have bright blue feet, and they do a lovely little mating dance where they show off their feet to one another and sort of touch beaks with each other. It's really quite sweet. But I would say if there's anything that the Galapagos are really, really, really well known for, it's the giant tortoises. Yeah. You'll see giant tortoises in a couple other islands in the world, but nothing like what you see in the Galapagos. And they are extraordinarily large, some well over a meter long, several hundred kilos in many cases, and they don't actually know how old they can grow.
There's this one tortoise, I think I was celebrating 180th birthday or something like that, and I've heard that it's the one which Napoleon was kind of taking care of, but I don't think so. That's the one in the Galapagos. It's a different island. But I was wondering, like, how old actually can they get?
Yeah, they're not really sure. The best guess they have right now is about 180 to 200 years, but they expect that is not correct. That it's possible that they could live between 200 and 300 years.
Oh, wow.
It's just remarkable. It's absolutely remarkable. And
they've seen stuff.
Yeah, they've seen a few things. Well, they were some of the reasons that people came to the Galapagos originally, because they were so slow and they were huge and they were easy to catch. When there was a lot of whaling happening in the Pacific, people went to the Galapagos to just store these tortoises because they can live for 6 to 8 months without food or water. So you could put them on the ship and just keep them there with no food or water, and then the whalers and the sailors could eat them, and they had hundreds of pounds of meat on them. And so, unfortunately, of course, they almost drove them to extinction, but thankfully they were able to save most of the species. But they're incredible creatures, just incredible.
So I have a question from my co-host. He asked if we can pet them. But then, honestly, when I was doing the script, I was like, do you have any questions? And he was like, can you actually pet the tortoise? Can you touch it?
Well, so this is a great question, actually, because people ask this all the time. So let me answer in general. It's good practice with wildlife of any kind that you stay a certain distance away from the wildlife. But in many cases, there's a very curious wildlife that will come to you. And unless, of course, it's a very dangerous animal, which the Galapagos doesn't have any dangerous animals, they can come to you, and yes, they can touch you. I mean, sea lions and seals, and I've had lizards who have come to kind of inspect you, and crabs that crawl over you and various other things. Insofar as the tortoises, yes, you can touch them, but again, it depends on how you do it. So walking over to a wild tortoise and, running through the bushes and trying to touch it or grab it, not cool. But there are places and times where they are kind of around you. And again, if you're sitting there and they are coming towards you and they come within arm's reach, you can very gently sort of touch them. It also depends a little bit on what your guide says, what the naturalist says. We always have to follow their instructions. So if they feel like it's not the right situation, then we need to back away. But otherwise, yes, you can, but you have to do it carefully and with the permission of the people that you're with.
So regarding to that, is there any animal quite dangerous on the island? Anything that can hurt you?
No. Okay. Any animal, if put in a really desperate situation, could cause harm, right? I mean, these birds have big, sharp beaks or something of that nature. But no, there is no aggressive animal. There's no big cat. There's no predators, major predators. The only predators on the island are birds of prey. So they have a native hawk and a native owl as well that hunts there. If there was anything that would be of some danger, it would be in the water. So they have reef sharks and things like that. But again, as somebody who loves wildlife, and I've been diving with sharks before, a lot of people are terrified of sharks. They think if they see one that a shark's just going to come up from any shark sees a human, it's just going to come up and bite you.
And there's the soundtrack from the Jaws actually going around you as well.
Yeah, of course. And of course, that's not the case. I mean, particularly with reef sharks, they generally, are 2 meters or less, which is relatively small. And they see us and they go the opposite direction. They really don't want anything to do with us. So in short, no. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. That sounds actually really amazing. And I know that there are also whales wandering around the islands that you can kind of observe.
We have not had that opportunity yet. So we do snorkeling. I should clarify, it's snorkeling, not diving, not proper diving. It's always possible. It's just that we're normally snorkeling in shallower waters than the whales would prefer. But yes, we see dolphins, we see whales. I'll tell you what we snorkel with all the time. I mean, so many of them that it almost is annoying at some point are sea turtles. There are green sea turtles everywhere. I mean, to the point where you're like, okay, man, get out of the way. Like, I'm trying to snorkel here.
And they're just corals.
Yeah. You want to see the coral and the fish, and these sea turtles are just kind of in the way. You're like, hey, come on. But that's a really special thing to be able to share the water with those animals.
I just really imagine how you kind of jump into the water, but you don't really jump into water because you're stuck on the bunch of turtles.
Stuck on the surface.
And you're like, let me dive. Well, one more question about the Galapagos and the contact with locals. So can you maybe go visit them, or I don't know if there are any souvenir shops that you can visit and maybe just interact with the local people as well?
Sure. So I would mention a couple things. Number one, our naturalist on board the ship, where we are, we're primarily aboard a ship in the Galapagos for the 10 nights. He is from the Galapagos, of course. All of the crew are also local from the Galapagos as well. So there's about 7 crew members on board the ship that are local from the Galapagos. But in terms of interacting with locals, as I said, on the islands, there are very few people that are living outside of the 3 settlements that are there. Now, we spend a day in Puerto Ayora, which is the main town, where we visit the Darwin Research Station, which is where a lot of the research is being done on saving the tortoises and various other things that are happening on the islands. We spend about a half a day or so in the town of Puerto Ayora exactly to do souvenir shopping, so that you can pick up little things here or there, maybe go to the pharmacy, pick up the suntan lotion that you ran out of, all those little things that you want to do. And we have an opportunity there to visit the highlands of Puerto Ayora, which are wildly different from anything else that we see in and around the islands, because we can use a car then to go up into these really beautiful sort of rainy highlands, which are quite different than the coastal areas that we primarily stick to. So the answer is yes, we do get to meet and interact with some of the locals, but really only on one day, simply because there aren't locals elsewhere in the islands that we get to interact with. It's really just the wildlife.
Yeah, you meet them all in
all the
one
ones
day.
that you're going to meet, you basically meet in one day. Yes, that's true.
And just to clarify, so as a single solo traveler, you can enter the islands at all, or you can just go to the city, but not really to the other wildlife islands?
Yeah, that's a good question. So as a single solo or individual traveler, or like as a family, if you wanted to fly to the Galapagos, you fly to the Galapagos from Ecuador, and you could stay in the main town and do day trips to some of the other islands, but you have to be with a licensed guide because it's a protected marine reserve and a protected national park. I think through the park system, you can apply for permits to go to these places if you have your own boat. But I understand that they are very selective as to who that they would give those to, because they want to make sure that you're doing the right things.
We'll definitely get to the part with the photographs, but I would like to just switch it and put it by the end. So actually our listeners are forced to listen to this podcast to the end. This is my strategy now. And I wanted to talk a little bit more with you, Alex, about logistics. So you mentioned that you always have a lot of tour guides and some like scientists and people responsible for a lot of things on not just the cruises, but also on the trips. So how do you usually build up this kind of crew around the trips?
Sure. Well, I mean, it varies quite differently from a trip that's on a boat. Temu and I, we've had the privilege of traveling to many, many different places and being in the industry for a very long time, and finding people we trust that know people in, perhaps the new destinations that we want to explore. So just references are such a big deal. Somebody that's been there and, can vouch for a guide or an expert in a certain location is a huge deal. And then we go and we spend a bunch of time scouting and meeting with all the different potential people that could be a part of the experience. And every destination is different. For example, like in Norway, we have an experience where we work with lots of different kind of small operators and have different guides and photographers and experts depending on, the part of the experience. Or in Morocco, for instance, we have one kind of true expert guide that's with us from the beginning all the way to the end that we've been working with like over the years. I like to think that Temu and I are pretty personable, and we're kind of like we're easy to charm people. And we have friends kind of all over the world. so that we've developed relationships too.
I was wondering maybe about what they are focused on. Like, for example, I know that during a trip to Antarctica, which our common friend went, there was a scientist who was focused on the research of the icebergs. Yeah, so people who are traveling with you to Antarctica can find out more about the icebergs. I think to Morocco, there is a scientist or anyone, the guide, who is focused maybe more on like a cultural aspect.
Yes, absolutely.
So I was wondering,
as Alex said, I mean, I think the fun part is that every destination is a little bit different. But on all of our programs, right, you're going to have a photo instructor who's giving you photo instruction. You're also going to have either a cultural guide, like in Morocco, somebody who is an expert in Morocco culture, is a Moroccan themselves, blah, 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 has been a professional tour guide for a long time, that's going to give you a full cultural experience. And then we will add in some experts in a certain pottery experts or people that have been doing, local bakers or something of that nature, those experts that we'll bring in to have us kind of accentuate and add into an experience. In a place like Antarctica, for instance, you have people who are experts in ocean animals and icebergs and how water moves and focuses and the biology of the place in general. You're also going to have polar historians who can tell you all about Shackleton and the age of exploration and where these whaling stations are and who got stranded here and there. And so you get this really rich kind of history of all of those places. When we're in Alaska, we have a professional bear guide who goes out to the wilds of Alaska with us and knows some of these bears by name. Mm-hmm. He's been with these wild bears for 20 years. And so it really depends on the program.
I wonder if I can take an occasion to actually say for the Galapagos trip, we have a pre-trip extension that starts in Quito, the capital of Ecuador, which is a beautiful city up at like pretty decent altitude. So even though it's like right on the equator, it's actually quite cool. And then we include the flight from Quito to the Galapagos, and that's when they get on board the Samba, which is the boat that we've been working with. It has 7 cabins, passengers, along with a crew, and a nice ratio of kind of crew, naturalist guides. So people really, I think, feel really well tended to. Once you get on board, pretty much everything is included. Mm-hmm. Used to all the different things that there are on board, like kayaks and snorkels. And as I think Temu mentioned, we provide wetsuits.
Of course. I've heard also about the extension to the Machu Picchu with this specific trip to Galapagos. I think you are managing that as well. Is it after the trip?
Yes. The way that we're doing it with this trip, it's after the trip. And that's the part that I personally know kind of quite well. So what you would do is after the trip, you fly back to the Ecuadorian mainland, and then people will fly up to Cusco, which is at about 11,000 feet. And we have about a week-long experience between Cusco, the sacred valley of the Inca, which is this extraordinary fertile valley and this incredible opportunity to dive into Incan culture and incredible cuisine. We spent a couple days there and then eventually hop on a train that we take through these beautiful valleys to get to the incredible city of Machu Picchu, kind of the Incan fortress of Machu Picchu, which is actually a little bit lower altitude. It's interesting to watch the kind of dry Andes turn into jungle. Mm-hmm. And we stay there. We stay overnight. I was thinking Machu Picchu is one of those places that people talk so much about that I remember before going, I wondered if maybe it was overhyped, and it's an impossible place to overhype. It's so incredible that it exists. I've been numerous times, and I could keep on going back again. It's places like Antarctica and other places that I just feel that way about. Yeah. And the whole experience, we've thought about kind of when we want to be in certain places for the right light, which is something that we think a lot about for photographers. And we incorporated a number of really wonderful experiences with some of the native communities and indigenous communities in Peru that were intimate, that felt just really genuine and not touristy. And I'm kind of always really proud when we can do that. So it's truly extraordinary. Our guide is awesome. I couldn't recommend it more highly.
Yeah, I could tell it's like a good combination of some wildlife, some like a nature experience, and then maybe connected with the trip to Peru and experience something cultural and like a culinary trip as well. And I have to tell you that going to Machu Picchu is my childhood dream as a history nerd. I'm
really?
just like super interested in that.
Well, we need to get you to the Galapagos and to Machu Picchu. We'll do both. We'll do both for you. We'll give you the best of both worlds.
Vámonos.
About the budgeting and about the prices of the trips that you are organizing. So let's maybe focus on the Galapagos as well, but you can also kind of describe it more generally. How much should people think it's going to cost them to get to Galapagos, for instance? For
the Galapagos trip, we have a kind of a set price. I think we'll point people to the actual details online somehow, but the trip is almost $9,000 per person, kind of $8,950, and that has very comprehensive inclusions. Once you get there, of course, you need to factor in your flight, from where you're coming from. But really, aside from that, pretty much everything you need is going to be covered. And then, our other trips, they vary in price. I'd say starting around $5,000 to maybe around $11,000 for most of the trips. And then kind of Antarctica is a separate thing aside from that. So it is pricey, but we've done a lot of comparative research. I've seen many different boats that go to Antarctica, and that for the experience that it is right.
Yeah. We also mentioned all these people that you have on board and all these equipments that are available and everything around it. So that all includes. So I was just like trying to depict the price range that people should be expecting. And of course, all the information can people find on your website, Open Sky Expeditions. So I think you can just get in touch there and find out more about every specific trip.
And something that I would add, if it's okay, we take time to answer people's questions, and I think to feel approachable in that sense. But I would say that's something, as far as the price, that I think people have valued.
Well, of course, I need to mention that our common friend, Maciej, that kind of get us in touch. So I know him for over 20 years, and I never, ever seen him so excited about stuff or about any trips that the one he took with you. So it's impressive.
Oh, we're honored.
We are very honored.
Let's jump to the last part, kind of a quick part, but I think it's going to be very, very valuable for our listeners, no matter which country they are from. And it's about the photography. So people tend to do thousands of photographies on their trips. They really want to kind of keep the memories from the places they've been to on the pictures. Yeah. I mean, I do it myself as well. And I'm coming back to the trips just scrolling by phone. Yeah. Let's get to the maybe just like very easy practical tips first. Yeah. Sure. You got all different kind of phone users, camera users, Temu. So what would you say is some kind of like a general tips that people should be following to have a nice pictures from the holidays?
Right. Well, first of all, I just want to say that you're absolutely right, that on all of our trips, we have people shooting with things all the way from phones all the way up to really big, expensive cameras. And we're happy to sort of accommodate all of those folks that want to come along and learn, because even if you just learn a few things here or there, you're going to end up taking better pictures with your phone. That'll look better on your phone or on the computer screen or shared on social media. So you can always pick up a few things. And on top of that, you're going to get full education about the place that you're in, whether it's cultural or natural. But if I had to go with just a few things for photographers, things that are in general, for all photographers, from iPhone or smartphone shooters all the way up to sort of more advanced camera users, there's a couple things that I think really just off the top of my head, that are so important. Something that drives me up the wall, drives me crazy, is when people do not have level horizons in their shot. When the ground is slanted from one side to the other, it is so easy. Just hold your phone so that the ground or whatever it is, you have a level horizon. It is the easiest thing in the world to do while you're taking the photo, and really easy to do after the fact too. So even if you mess it up just a little bit, level your horizon, it looks much better. There's a rule in photography that we call the rule of thirds, which means placing the important things in the photograph in thirds of the image, both third from the top or from the bottom and also in from the sides. So if, for instance, you're shooting something where you have maybe some water in the foreground and then a little bit of land and then a little bit of sky, try putting those things so that they fill about a third of the sky, a third of the ground in the middle, and a third of the ground should be at the water at the bottom. And if you have a penguin or a Galapagos tortoise or something like that, don't put it center of the frame and don't put it all the way to the side of the frame, but put it more or less on the left third or the right third. Humans find it pleasing to the eye, and it's a pretty easy one to follow. You'll also notice, for instance, on your smartphone that they often have a grid that you can actually put on the camera, and that will be in thirds. I think one of the most important things that people really goof up all the time if they're not really experienced photographers is light, right? I mean, unless, of course, if you're an artist or you're shooting for a certain effect, you can shoot any way you want to. But generally speaking, photos are going to look much better if the light source, usually the sun, is behind you, so that the light is coming from behind you and you are not shooting into the light. When you shoot into the light, all the colors are gone. You have a lot of contrast. The number of photos that I have seen of people on a beach saying, hey, we're here on a beach, and the sun is directly above them and you can't see any of their faces because they're all in shadow. Just turn them around the other way so that the sun is behind you and you can shoot them in the light. And the last major thing that I would say, or one of the last major things I would say, is that try not to have both light and shadow on your subject. So if, for instance, you can't get someone in full light, then move them fully into the shadows so at least the light is even. Even if it's lower light, it's better to have even light than it is to have half of it bright sunlight and half of it shadow, or shadow coming across the middle of your face where the top is lit and the bottom is not lit. So just try and be aware of those things. Those are some of the big tips that I would say for folks.
Oh, that's so great. I didn't have any additional questions. I think I'm just gonna cut this part and I'm just gonna make it like a social media video so people can listen to that they can, just be aware of these like super easy tips. Are there any special tips for, let's say, mobile phones, which you would like to mention? So, so we live in the social media times. Is it good to take pictures standing or horizontal ones? Okay,
great. These are great questions. Number one, it depends, like all photography, it depends a little bit on what you plan to use it for. So if you're filming or you're shooting still photography specifically so that you can put it on Instagram Reels or TikTok, you're going to want to shoot vertically because those things fit better on those formats. So vertical photos, vertical video for Instagram and that sort of stuff, TikTok, are much better. If you're shooting because you want to put it on a computer screen or a presentation, or you'd like to make a YouTube video, those are much better when they're widescreen, horizontal like this. So it depends a little bit on where is this going to be posted, where is it going to be shared. You want to shoot that accordingly. The one thing that I would say, and this applies to some extent for video, but really for photography, is that it depends on what your subject is, right? Mm-hmm. So if the photo that you're trying to take is of a beautiful white sand beach and the beach extends off into the distance and there's palm trees and bright blue sky and lovely clouds and what have you, that's probably going to work better as a horizontal shot because the subject, the beach, is horizontal itself. If you are taking a picture of several towers along a skyline that are very vertical, that might work better as a vertical shot because the subject itself is vertical. So just think about what you're shooting, and that can often lead you to figuring out which is best for you. But in the end, you know what? The best way to learn all of this is just to experiment. Take some horizontally, take some vertically, and see what you like best. And I think that's the best way for people to learn.
But you end up with like 1,000 pictures from the same place.
Yes. Well, listen,
and there's a lot of editing.
That is a part of learning that you just have to go through. Hey, listen, it could be worse. 30 years ago, you'd be editing through 30 rolls of film that would have cost you $1 million and would take you 3 weeks to get back. So at least now we can see our mistakes immediately. Yeah. And and the other thing I would say, just very specifically about mobile phones, a couple of things that I think a lot of people don't realize is that you can choose on a mobile phone where your focus is by tapping your finger, and that will create where the focus is. If you tap and hold and drag up or down, you can make the image brighter or darker, so you can control some of the exposure. And the other thing that I would say that's really a lot of people don't know is particularly if you're shooting something fast moving, like sports or a fast moving animal or something like that, or you're trying to capture one specific instant, hold down the button to shoot, and it will shoot several photos, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 photos all in a row. It's called a burst, and you'll be able to capture that specific moment that you want. So those are just some tips for mobile phone users.
Great. Definitely valuable. I hope so. Everyone's going to now think about it when they take the pictures. What about the camera? So let's say just like a random camera that you can afford, nothing really crazy, nothing telescopic kind of thing. What would you say are the aspects that photographers should be focusing on besides shooting everything in automatic mode?
Well, okay, listen, we have this technology, right? They're very intelligent people who have spent decades making this really easy for us. So use those advantages, right? Like I shoot in full manual mode because I have been shooting now for so long that I no longer think about it. I know what I want to do and my fingers just do it. But for a lot of people, that's not the case. And that's why they have auto mode or intelligent auto or a program mode or modes where you can prioritize one thing or another, like shutter speed or aperture priority. And really the key is to understand what you want out of a photograph and then use the camera in the easiest way possible. Don't make it difficult for yourself. So I think what I would say is outside of the basic sort of compositional things that we talked about, I think what I would say for camera users in general is if you really want to get the most out of your camera, the thing that you really need to learn is something called the exposure triangle, because there are three main things that photographers control: the shutter speed, the aperture, which is how wide or small the opening of the lens is, and the ISO, which for all intents and purposes is the sensitivity of the sensor. It can be more sensitive or less sensitive to light. There are effects for each of those aspects. And so understanding what those three things are will really help you as a photographer understand how best to use your camera. But as a couple basic things, right? Using shutter priority, for instance, which is you get to choose how fast the camera is shooting. For sports or moving animals, that's your best bet, right? For landscapes, you want to use something like aperture priority, which will affect what we call the depth of field, or how much of an image is going to be in focus.
So that's, for example, if you have something really sharp in the front, but also a bit more kind of blurry in the back, yeah?
That's exactly right. So depth of field, that's exactly what depth of field is. So for instance, in portraiture, right, for taking portraits of people, you'll notice that like portrait mode on your iPhone, right, it's got to be close. You're supposed to get it close to something and then it will blur all the background, right? That is known as a very shallow depth of field, and it's achieved by having your aperture very wide open on your camera. It means that the thing that is in focus here or just a little bit, but then everything behind it is going to be out of focus. Whereas for a landscape image, for instance, you might want to try having an aperture that is much smaller because you're going to have much more of the landscape in focus, not just maybe the flowers up front, but the field behind them and the mountain in the background or the fence that's in the background there. You're also going to have that in focus as well. And things with shutter speed, right? A really high shutter speed is going to freeze the action of a bird flapping its wings in mid-flight. But maybe you want a little bit of motion on the wings. Maybe you want there to be a little bit of blur for artistic reasons. So maybe you want to slow that shutter speed down a little bit. So understanding how all these things interact and work together is a little confusing in the beginning. But once you start to tackle those things, all of a sudden the camera blossoms in front of you and you can really start using it to its full potential.
Yeah, most of the cameras shoot the picture nice, but if you want to, as you said, the shutter speed, I like to kind of play with the waterfalls.
That's exactly it.
Yeah, the running water. Yep. Looks really lovely. Yeah. But yeah, that's what you do with this one.
One thing, as Temu was talking about all that, I like to think that I'm not a slow, dumb person, but it's taken me a while, actually. Maybe Temu's laughing. It's taken me a while, to let some of these concepts with photography kind of sink in. And it's quite different to go into like a classroom and then go back and be by yourself to practice these things. But to be in an incredible place where you want to be doing photography, where you're with a small group, it's intimate, and you get to ask someone questions live.
Yeah.
And not only get those answers live, but also be traveling with other people that are interested in doing the same, that might be eager to share, the way that they're doing their photography. It's like a way to learn in like a 4-dimensional way.
And no, I was just going to say one thing we haven't mentioned, what I think is really important, is that part of the instruction of the photography is, we take time out of the trips to do image critiques where we look at each other's images and we point out things that we like and we don't like, and ask questions of one another. And how did you shoot this? And why did you shoot that? And what were you thinking? And did you like this better as a vertical, or I shot it several different ways? How are you shooting this situation? Well, I'm shooting it like this because I'm trying to achieve this effect. And by learning from each other and then having somebody like me or another photo pro along who can sort of say, that's great, I love what you're thinking and what you're doing. Maybe try something like this or try something like that. You can ask us out in the field, but then we also take time out of the trips to enjoy each other's photography, look at each other's photography, learn from each other, and hopefully, I can do a little direct instructing along the way. And don't let Alex fool you; he's a great photographer. So he's being very modest. Yeah, he's being very modest.
I know. Well, I've gotten to improve doing a lot of this travel. It's just that I haven't been teaching it like you have.
Yeah.
Sometimes we have really keen photographers that want to bring their spouse, and sometimes they may hear all the stuff that the photographers are doing and think, I don't know if this trip is for me and everything. And some of the feedback that we've gotten from these spouses or travel partners of photographers is that they end up having an amazing time. They have our expert guide like all to themselves. So, yeah.
I thought you were going to mention this kind of boyfriends of Instagram thing, where you bring your spouse to the photography trip and he or she is not happy about taking pictures, but then he or she ended up with amazing pictures, and it's like, boyfriends of Instagram.
Hilarious.
Yeah, it is. That's
right. all the different sorts of ways.
One more last question.
Yeah.
Regarding to the photography is the post-production.
Yeah.
So I know that you spend a lot of time editing the pictures, of course. So just the quick maybe tips, maybe programs that people might be having in their phones, in their computers.
Yeah. So I don't do a lot of phone editing. I do most of my stuff on computer, of course. So there's a standard program called Lightroom by Adobe, who also, of course, makes Photoshop. It is a $10 subscription per month, and you get Photoshop and Lightroom. And you can actually use it on mobile as well. I think there's there's Lightroom mobile as well. It's powerful, and it's not too terribly difficult to understand. if you start just experimenting with it, you'll get to know it pretty quickly and easily. That's kind of the photo standard that most photographers are using as a program like Lightroom. That being said, even the basic editing mode on your iPhone or smartphone is going to have a lot of the similar sort of things: highlights, exposure, shadows, color saturation, this kind of thing. So there's a couple things that I think most people all should take a look at, which is, number one, trying to get through the idea that it's difficult or it's often not great to make global changes to the whole photograph. What you want to try and do is you want to try and fix certain parts of the photograph individually. So for instance, instead of using the exposure slider to bump up the exposure of the whole image, try and figure out, well, what parts do I want brighter? Well, you probably want the shadows a little bit brighter. So leave the exposure slider where it is and just bump up the shadows a little bit, or bump the highlights back down if the bright parts of the image are a little bit too bright. Using something like vibrance, normally there are two sliders for the colors. There's something called vibrance and something called saturation. Now, I could go into a long detailed answer as to the difference between those two. The easiest thing is just to move them individually and see what they do. And you'll notice that I would say about 80% of the time, vibrance, using a little bit of vibrance, does a better job than using a little bit of saturation. There's another slider on most of these things called clarity, which is actually like a micro contrast. It adds a little bit of contrast. It's like a color boost and a contrast boost. But again, using just a little bit of it can do a really great job. And I think overall, the thing I would say is be gentle with your photo editing. And the last thing I would say is don't forget to crop where you need to crop as well. Sorry, last thing.
How do you feel about the filters?
Oh, I have...
when you were saying
I have long and
about going not really crazy.
yeah. I have long and complex feelings about filters, but I would say you should do what makes you happy. Like photography. And I truly mean that. Like ultimately, photography is mostly for us, right? I mean, maybe you're selling something, maybe you're trying to produce something for an account or what have you. Okay, whatever. But ultimately, if it's what you like, you should do that. I don't use filters that much. I do use them occasionally if I'm going for a specific look. But I generally try and achieve that look through individual editing as opposed to with a filter. But you know what? Like I said earlier, geniuses have been working on this for a long time and they're making it easy for you. So if it's easy enough to just slide on a filter, you know what? Slide on that filter and enjoy your photograph, because that ultimately is what it's about. You're not trying to make me happy. You're trying to make yourself happy and enjoy the photography that you take home from a trip or from a night out or wherever. And that's the most important thing. So do what feels best to you.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Thank you very much. And I would love to also say that I think you might be in different stages of your photography. So, for example, I was obsessed with vignette, how you say like a black surrounding in one part of my life. And, I actually ended up recently trying to, erase it from the pictures that I took in Australia. And it's really hard.
Yeah.
So, rather if you're shooting anything, just try to do it as plain as is possible and then maybe kind of play with it in the post-production.
And maybe also, like you said, think of making copies, right? Of instead of editing the original photo, make the copy of the photo to edit and play with. That way you can always go back to the original photo. If you have a vignette phase and you come out of your vignette phase, then you still have the original photo to go back to at the end. So.
Exactly. Definitely better idea. All right, guys. Thank you very much for all these super valuable tricks and tips and information that you gave me. I think we are definitely over the time that I was supposed to kind of record. And I just wanted to say all your trips, also specific to Galapagos, are going to be available for next year as well. So as I mentioned before, just check the Open Sky Expedition website. And I think Temu and Alex will be happy to answer all your questions.
Thank you so much, Tina.
Yeah.
Such a pleasure.
Tina, this was an absolute pleasure. We're honored to have been your first English language podcast. Thank you so much for having us. And yes, if anyone wants to reach out to us, please, we would be happy to answer all your questions and would love to see you join us for some of our adventures.
Definitely. I will try to, actually. I will be very excited because I'm stuck in Dubai right now, which is okay, man. I would love to maybe change the place for a little bit. Anyway.
Not a bad place to be stuck. I mean, come on, in the end. So.
Well, during the winter.
There are worse places.
I can tell, definitely. So thank you very much. It's been a ride. I have to tell you, I've been a bit stressed out about doing this whole conversation, but as we dug into it, I really, really enjoyed it. And thank you very much for all your lovely tips. And of course, for our listeners, so this has been a special English edition. So all the other Všesvet podcasts, they're in Slovak. So if you want to practice your Slovak language, that's the best way how to do it.
Thank you for not doing this in Slovak. It would have been very difficult for me in particular. So
Alex, I'm aiming at you if you want to add 7th language to your repertoire.
Yes, very try. Do I say Ďakujem? How is it? How do you say? Something like that, yeah.
Just amazing. Yeah. I'm glad you didn't use the other word that Maciej told you to say. So of course, if you want to reach us or if you enjoyed this podcast in English, I'm happy actually to continue doing it in English. So we'll see how that goes. If you want to get in touch, of course, we are on Instagram, Facebook, anywhere else. So we'll be happy if you do so. So thank you very much, guys. Enjoy any place that you are right now at and enjoy your next trips coming on.
Thank you so much. It was our pleasure.
Thank you so much, Tina.
Thanks to all the listeners.
Great pleasure.
Thank you.